Okay, so it's been a while since we've met. Being away, and then also I was sick last week. Um, but as I said before I started recording, nothing like a good dose of antibiotics to set the system straight. Um, so we're I'll say the bracha in a moment, but we're in Baba Batra, um, page 58 in the Koran, or 10b in the traditional pagination, on a lengthy um, tangent about the power of charity. So, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, shekidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So we have this story here where we left off. It is related. Yes, it is related. Ifra Hormuz, the mother of King Shapur, king of Persia, sent 400 dinars to Rabbi Ami, but he did not accept them. Now, there are many stories with this kind of motif where there's the mother or the daughter of the king of the Roman Empire, or it's the Persian Empire, which begs the question as to whether, sure, begs the question as to whether this story actually happened or not. We can't imagine that the mother of the here, grab. No, grab. There's chairs outside. So, and there is a chair hiding under here. Yeah, yeah. It's a new. Sure. Right, yeah, especially since we want to dedicate that new Torah cover next week. Okay.
You want
That's okay. All right, we got people coming into the office. Okay. So a story like this, that the mother of the king of Persia has any kind of relationship with a rabbi, kind of begs the question, did this really happen or not? And it's more that it's a story that the rabbis are writing in order to teach a point, as if the rabbis are important enough that the mother of the king of Persia would have something to do with the rabbis. So often with stories like this, it kind of highlights the importance of the rabbis and the importance of what they're teaching. And to even make it more important, they're making the protagonist of the story, or the antagonist, depending on the perspective, be someone so important like this. So it's related that Ifra Hormuz, the mother of King Shapur, king of Persia, and we don't know actually if there was a King Shapur of Persia at that time. There are also a lot of Jewish children's books that feature King Shapur in them. So she sent 400 dinars to Rabbi Ami, but he didn't accept them. She then sent them to Rava, and he accepted them for the sake of peace with the kingdom. So how dare Rabbi Ami decline a gift from the mother of the king of Persia? That could be a dangerous thing. It could be dangerous for yourself, as how dare anyone refuse a gift from the royalty? You'll be punished, or maybe the royalty will punish the entire Jewish community. So Rava did take the gift, and for the sake of peace with the kingdom. So there's an H there. He accepted them for the sake of peace with the kingdom. A Jew A Jew should not accept charity from a Gentile in public. If he is unable to survive without such charity, he should receive the money in private. Nevertheless, if a Gentile king or officer donates money to the Jews for the poor, the money is accepted for the sake of peace with the kingdom. These funds are then given in secret to poor Gentiles, as in the case involving Rava. And then the Ramah, a medieval halachic source, writes that if the money was earmarked for distribution among the Jewish poor, it should be given to them, and the donor should not be deceived. The money should be given to poor Gentiles only if the official did not specify how it was to be used. So there is this sense that we want to be careful with money from Gentiles, and that, in a sense, it could be considered treif. But Rava thought it was okay to use it, better for peace within the greater community in terms of relations between Jews and Gentiles, than to not accept it at all.
Is this just charity?
This is for charity. This is a.
It is accepting charity from Gentiles.
Right. So so it's an interesting question today about how charity works and how charity funds work within different communities. So, within our Greater Washington Jewish community, there's the Hebrew Free Loan Society. So that's something created by the Jewish community for the Jewish community. And probably because it is a Jewish-funded charity fund, it's probably restricted just for Jews. And so...
Yeah. Restricted just for Jews to get the money, or
yes.
Restricted to actually donate to the fund?
No, anybody could donate to the fund, but it's only restricted to Jews to get money from the fund. And so there were, just the name of the fund reflects how old the fund is, and that there was a time when every ethnic community was on their own in America to take care of themselves. And so the Jewish community has a 2,000-year history of taking care of itself all around the world, as it is forced from one country to another and needing to set up shop again. So Jews know for sure about what this is all about. But then, immigrant communities in America from the turn of the last century, with the Irish community, the Italian community, the Polish community, they all have these benevolent funds in order to take care of themselves. I don't know if they're still around today, but Michael.
When the banking crisis of the late 80s hit, a lot of smaller institutions went under. There were a boatload of ethnically oriented savings and loans in Baltimore, particularly. Romanian American savings and loans. And many of them went under or merged because they could no longer meet the requirements of the new lending laws. But there were a boatload of them, particularly Baltimore, which has a big immigrant.
Yeah. So, right. So, again, so charitable organizations within each ethnic group common, and still, so I think it's less so in the Jewish community today than it was 100 years ago, just because of the success of the Jewish community in integrating into American society and being able to rise above the poverty level. That also is a stereotype. There are poor Jews around, and so the Federation here in Washington and the Jewish Federation in all large metropolitan areas do try to take care of poor and indigent Jews, but there's also there are also things to do within the community at large to get help, like to sign up for food stamps or other federal programs like that. And there could also be county programs, depending on what county in America we live in and how wealthy the county is in terms of providing services for the poor. Like, I don't know, if kids are in public school and there's free breakfast or free lunch, that could be a federal program, it could be a county program, things like that. Because I know that's a thing in Montgomery County. Even when there's a snow day, the alert comes to my phone from a text about how, if you've signed up for lunch, you can here are the schools that are going to be open, so you could still get your lunch even though there's no school today. So the whole mechanism of taking care of the poor is quite different than it was in the time of the rabbis and the Talmud and throughout history. So back to this. There's a sense like, how dare we even consider taking charity from the Gentiles? We don't want to be indebted to them in any way, because being indebted to them, kind of like based on the Talmud that we were studying last year, could be considered an acknowledgement that of their way of life, and that somehow you're agreeing with it or condoning the way of life of a Gentile by taking their money. And when a Gentile especially is a pagan, that's a lot worse. So the Persians at this time, not sure if they were Zoroastrians yet. So a Zoroastrian believes in two gods, the God of good and the God of evil, not that there's one God. So for a Jewish perspective, that's idolatry. Unless you believe in one God, anything else is considered pagan. So, but Rava said, well, better to take the money for the sake of peace with the kingdom. Then we go on. Rabbi Ami heard what Rava had done and was angry. He said, does Rava not accept the lesson of the verse? When the boughs are withered, they shall be broken off. The women shall come and set them on fire, from Isaiah 27, meaning that when righteousness has ceased from a particular nation, it's time for its citizens to be punished, and therefore we should not help them perform any meritorious deeds which would delay their punishment. In other words, if God says that it's time for the Persians to start losing power by taking charity from them, we are allowing them to do a good deed, and by allowing them to do a good deed, we are delaying God's punishment for them. So if they're supposed to decline, you let them decline. Don't let them do anything good that might delay their decline. That's how Rabbi Ami is relating to this verse, which the last time we met, there were a series of verses like this that were being discussed. The Gemara asks, and why did Rava accept the money? The Gemara answers, he did so for the sake of peace with the kingdom. So even though they're in decline, they're still in power, and they could still do damage to us, better to accept the money. So it's not like he didn't agree with the verse. He thought there was some other issue that outweighed the following the verse. The Gemara asks, but did Rabbi Ami not also see the importance of accepting the money for the sake of peace with the kingdom? Like, why didn't he agree with Rava that peace with the kingdom outweighed the learning from this verse? The Gemara answers, Rabbi Ami maintains that Rava should have distributed the money to the Gentile poor rather than the Jewish poor, as it is a disgrace to the Jews to require the kindness of the nations of the world in order to support their poor. The Gemara comments, in fact, Rava also gave the money to the Gentile poor and not to the Jewish poor. And Rabbi Ami got angry because those who reported the story to him did not conclude it before him. Consequently, Rav Ami was not informed that Rava had indeed given the money to the Gentile poor. So in other words, if Rav Ami had heard exactly how everything panned out, maybe he wouldn't have been angry. So he was jumping to conclusions because people didn't tell him the story. So now what that is referring to is that the Talmud refers to correspondence that would between Jewish communities in Babylonia. So, we take for granted today that, once I post this video, the recording of class today, then it's out there on the internet for anybody in the world to see. And for some bizarre reason, my YouTube channel has 142 subscribers. Not all of them are members of the synagogue. There are people and names and screen names, usernames. I have no idea who these people are, but they subscribe to my YouTube channel. So whatever I teach and record is out there on the internet forever. So, and that what I say here in my office at 9:46 on February 2nd, then at 10:30 or so when I post this video will now be available to the whole internet world. But in the time of the rabbis, that was far from the case. And all the rabbinical academies in Babylonia had people recording what took place in the academy, and they would then send out like a summary of what happened in the academy to other Jewish communities in Babylonia, and however long that would take, and then other communities would be studying what all the other communities would be learning. So that in the Talmud, it looks like there's a conversation going on between Rabbi Ami and Rava, but it's really a conversation through letters over the course of weeks, if not months, and then edited down a couple hundred years later in the form that we have it now. So it was not so usual for rabbis to actually be in conversation with each other in the same room. Like Rava is within one community, Rav Ami in another. There's Rabbah and Abaye, like all these pairs that come together in the course of the discussion in the Talmud. They were not living in the same community. They were the chief rabbis of the yeshivas in Babylonia at the time. Okay, but there were like study sessions, and it's possible that some of the rabbis went to some other rabbis' study sessions, but on a regular basis, rabbis were not in physical dialogue with each other. Okay, so red S means a slightly different topic now. It's taught in a Baraita. Again, a Baraita is a source from the time of the Mishnah that doesn't make it into the Mishnah. The following was said about Binyamin the righteous, and there's a P there, so that is personality. Who is Binyamin the righteous? This Binyamin appears to have lived during the Amoraic period. That's the time of the rabbis of the Talmud. Alternatively, he might be the Tana, the rabbi of the Mishnah, Rabbi Binyamin, student of Rabbi Akiva, or the Tana Abba Binyamin. So, in other words, the editor of our Talmud has no idea who this Binyamin is, and these are the suggestions. So it's taught, the following was said about Binyamin the righteous, who was appointed supervisor over the charity fund. Once, a woman came before him during years of drought and said to him, "My master, sustain me." He said to her, "I swear by the temple service that there is nothing left in the charity fund." She said to him, "My master, if you do not sustain me, a woman and her 7 sons will die." He arose and sustained her with his own funds. After some time, he fell deathly ill. The ministering angels said to the Holy One, blessed be he, Master of the universe, you said that anyone who preserves a single life in Israel is regarded as if he has preserved an entire world. Should then Binyamin the righteous, who saved a woman and her 7 sons, die after these few years, still in his youth? They immediately tore up his sentence. That is, he didn't die. A sage taught they added 22 years to his life. Okay, so this is a nice story about the power of charity, and also the dilemma that people who run charity funds face in dispersing funds, or if there aren't any funds to disperse, how to say no. Um, Frankly, I used to face this dilemma a lot in the time when I would get lots of phone calls every day. There would be random people calling, asking for money. And then on like a local rabbi listserv, people would say, have you heard? Did somebody so-and-so call you? Did you give money to this person? Because so like sometimes people are notorious for calling around asking for money. So
These just private.
these are just random individuals who are asking rabbis for money, who would also ask ministers for money. So they would just go around asking for money. So there are some rabbis and some synagogues who keep, giant gift cards around just in case anybody comes to the door asking for money. That used to be a thing too, that people sometimes would come to the door asking for money as opposed to over the phone.
You
So
don't get those calls anymore?
I maybe once every 6 months I get a call like that anymore. Um, so I never give money to people I don't know, um, and I justify that reasoning by saying my discretionary fund is earmarked for the congregation and for people in the congregation, and I don't have a way to vet people who just call me randomly. I
Right.
will refer people to the Hebrew Free Loan Society, and then they usually abruptly hang up. So, yeah, it's very sad in dealing with all of this, and there are also food pantries, and there are different churches around who do distributions of food, and there are other like Only Help, and then there are other organizations too where people know to line up in their cars to get food. And I believe it's no questions asked. It's just however many packages they have, they give out to whoever comes. And people could make judgments based on the kind of car that's waiting in line to get the food, right? And is that fair to make a judgment like that? So, um,
Right. You don't
so
know what's,
what's that?
no, I was gonna say, right. I mean, judgment about the car, you don't know the full story.
Right, of
And
course. Right,
right. And then also I think we once like somebody came to our house, a rabbi, with like a letter, like trying,
right,
so he could vet this other person who needed money and asking us
right.
and describing who they are.
So that's a
Yeah.
thing too. So depending on the neighborhood you're living in, so where Marlene lives in Dumont Oaks, there are Orthodox families who live there who belong to Southeast Hebrew on Lockwood Drive. So congregations like that and communities like that, Kent Mill, it's common too, like on a Sunday to see. Um, Rabbis, like in pairs or triplets, walking through the neighborhood, like with a letter or a binder, and they're knocking on people's doors, and it's for this charity in Israel, or for this poor person in Israel, or this sick child in Israel, or something like that, asking for money like that.
That's only going to Jewish homes?
But they would go, yeah, they'd look for the mezuzahs on the door, and they're figuring it's Kent Mill, so it's not just a lot of mezuzahs, but also like dressed people. So black coat, white shirt people going to other black coat, white shirt people, and that you'd think you're in a sympathetic community then who might be willing to give money.
They're probably pretty successful.
So I don't know if they're successful or not, so I don't know if people keep a pot of money in case they're home on a Sunday or maybe they make a point not to be home on a Sunday for when these people knock on the door. And that used to also be the case. I don't get this anymore here in Olney, but when we were on Lockwood Drive, some of these people would come to the synagogue also, saying, "Oh, Sharei Tefillah, that sounds like a Hebrew name, sounds like a name of an Orthodox synagogue." They'd be knocking on the door, then they see me. So then, but they still come in and talk to me, and even though I don't look like them, and I don't look like the kind of Orthodox rabbi that they might expect, they would be asking me for money also, and I would say no to them too. And
This has been going on for years.
yeah, of course.
When I was a kid.
In Baltimore.
Yeah, all the time.
It was a constant thing.
Constant, right? That's right. That's right. So it's yeah, it didn't happen in New Mexico, I don't
No,
think.
it doesn't happen
Right, but
You have to
it.
go, you have long walks.
Well, but I don't know if it happens around the Orthodox synagogue in Olney. So that neighborhood up there, up Georgia Avenue there, it's possible.
Right.
But I don't know if the black coat tzedakah people have heard about the Orthodox community yet in Olney to start walking around and saying maybe it's worth our money, our time to go up there to be asking for money.
Although we do get the Passover.
Yeah, so Chabad knows where we are,
Yeah.
but that's a different kind of, that's not really asking for charity, it's asking for support for Chabad itself. So that's a different kind of form of support for the community. So back to the story.
The Jewish version of Santa Claus, Chabad knows where he was.
That's right, that's right. Though the Chabad does avoid my house.
Oh,
They avoid yes. My next door neighbor, Chabad goes to my next door neighbor,
They have a
but
bad interaction?
I think the Chabad rabbi knows not to bother Rabbi Lehman. So yeah. So well, maybe he knows that I'm not going to support Chabad, and but perhaps other people will. Okay, so not to disparage Chabad in any way. That's a different kind of charity and support we're talking about. But here's Binyamin, the righteous, who said honestly, there's no more money in the charity fund. This woman says, "You're going to let me and my 7 sons die." Well, she doesn't say me. She says, "If you're not." Right. If you do not sustain me, a woman and her 7 sons will die. Right. So, so she's laying on the guilt. Don't blame her. She's desperate. And this is another risk of being in charge of the charity fund, that you might be tempted to give of your own money as the head of the charity fund in order to sustain people who come to you. It's like teachers in public school who might not have enough money from the principal to buy supplies for the classroom, and teachers use their own money to buy supplies for the classroom. Some teachers do that, some teachers just don't, and maybe they'll get reimbursed, maybe not. And so this is the kind of reimbursement that Binyamin got, that he fell ill even after giving of his own money. So tzedakah is supposed to sustain you in life. That's what we heard several paragraphs ago. And here's Binyamin giving his own money to sustain this woman and her 7 sons, and she's falling deathly ill. So how is it the angels are asking God that God's allowing him to fall ill? And God said, okay, angels, you're right. And so he didn't die, and not only didn't he die, they added 22 years to his life. So what was his when was he supposed to die? And then how did they know that 22 years was added to his life? We don't know, but that's the story of the power of charity. The sages taught there was an incident involving King Munbaz. So here's another name of a king. So there's Shapur we had before, and now it's Munbaz. So here's in personalities, Munbaz. Munbaz was the king of Adiabene, Adiabene, at the end of the Second Temple period. I don't know where that is. This tiny principality was an independent kingdom in the Parthian Empire, located in northern Aram Naharaim, in the area today that includes Kirkuk and Mosul. So it's Kurdish territory, northern Iraq. Okay, Mosul was an ancient Jewish community there. There was this book that came out a number of years ago about a guy he's a professor of Aramaic at UCLA, who went back to Mosul, where his grandparents or great-grandparents were from, to learn about the ancient Jewish Aramaic language that was taught there.
Walking the Bible?
No, it wasn't Walking the Bible. I forget the name of the book, but anyway, it talks about going back to Mosul, a few Jews who are left there, because around the time of the establishment of the State of Israel, a lot of Jews went to Israel from there, and they maintained speaking their Judeo-Aramaic at the time, and then he went to Israel to see some of the relatives and to learn some of that Aramaic also. Anyway, so that's just what came to mind with Mosul. So it goes back, some say it goes back to the time of the Babylonian exile. That's how ancient the Jewish community is there. So Kirkuk and Mosul, so that's where Munbaz was from. Members of the royal family of Adia Bene and some of the military joined the rebels against Rome during the Great Rebellion before the destruction of the temple. Munbaz's mother, Queen Helene, and his brother Izatz, called Zutus in the Talmudic sources, converted to Judaism and scrupulously kept the mitzvot. See Tractate Nida and also the Midrash of Breshit Rabbah. Initially, Munbaz abdicated the throne for the sake of his brother, but subsequently accepted the throne upon the latter's death. Josephus describes the history and conversion of this family in detail. So Josephus was a Jew who was an officer in the Roman army, and he wrote a history of the Jews, and that history is suspect. I mean, it's from Josephus that we learn about the story of Masada, and did all the people commit suicide in Masada? We don't know, but he tells that story. So we don't know. So if he tells the story of Munbaz, is it real? Is it real history? Is it legend that he just decides to put into his history of the Jews? Like the rest of his family, Munbaz appears to have been buried in the tombs of the kings in Jerusalem. So, okay, so that's Munbaz. So the sages taught there was an incident involving King Munbaz, who liberally gave away his treasures and the treasures of his ancestors in the years of drought, distributing the money to the poor. His brothers and his father's household joined together against him to protest against his actions, and they said to him, "Your ancestors stored up money in their treasuries and added to the treasures of their ancestors, and you are liberally distributing it all to the poor." King Munbaz said to them, "Not so. My ancestors stored up below, whereas I am storing above. As it is stated," and he's quoting Psalms, "truth will spring out of the earth, and righteousness will look down from heaven," meaning that the righteous deeds that one has performed are stored up in heaven. My ancestors stored up treasures in a place where the human hand can reach, and so their treasures could have been robbed, whereas I am storing up treasures in a place where the human hand cannot reach, and so they are secure, as it is stated also in Psalms, righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne. So here's Munbaz, whether he converted to Judaism at this point or not, but he's quoting Psalms and saying, this is what we're supposed to do. It's not just treasures here on earth, but we're talking about treasures that will be eternal, doing tzedakah like this. And he goes on, my ancestors stored up something that does not generate profit, as money sitting in a treasury does not increase. whereas I am storing up something that generates profit, as it's stated, and here he's quoting Isaiah, say of the righteous that it shall be well with them, for they shall eat the fruit of their doings. Right? So there's interest or there's profit from what the righteous do. My ancestors stored up treasures of money, whereas I am storing up treasures of souls, as it is stated in Proverbs. The fruit of the righteous is a tree of life, and he that wins souls is wise. My ancestors stored up for others, for their sons and heirs, when they themselves would pass from this world, whereas I am storing up for myself, as it is stated, and it shall be as righteousness to you, from Deuteronomy. My ancestors stored up for this world, whereas I am storing up for the world to come, as it stated, and your righteousness shall go before you, the glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Okay, so sometimes the rabbis will say, the rabbis could have taught this themselves, saying how powerful it is to do acts of tzedakah. But for them, it might be more powerful to put this teaching in the mouth of a Gentile. So whether Munbaz had converted or not, here's a Gentile king quoting Bible and doing good things. So if the Gentile king can do it, how much more so should we Jews do it too? And right, we should learn from this righteous Gentile. So they now we're back to the topic in the Mishnah, in which we're talking about when and for what purposes everybody in town is expected to contribute to the infrastructure of the town, and mainly to the protection of the town. Okay, so that's what we talked about a long time ago, which led to the topic of, do the sages need to contribute to the community fund like this? Don't sages have their own protection for the wisdom that they have? And that led to these several pages talking about sages and acts of tzedakah and stuff like that. So now we're back to what the Mishnah was talking about. The Gemara resumes its analysis of the Mishnah, which taught that one must reside in a place for 12 months in order to be considered a resident for the purposes of issues such as paying taxes. But if he bought himself a residence in the city, he is immediately considered like one of the people of the city. So living there, like renting a home, you have to rent for a year before you can be taxed. But if you're buying a home, you can be considered part of the city right away. The Gemara comments, the Mishnah is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, as it's taught in a Baraita that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says if he bought any amount of land in the city and not necessarily a residence, he's immediately considered like one of the people of the city. So all you have to do is buy land. You don't need to buy a house. The Gemara asks, but isn't it taught otherwise in a different Baraita? Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says if one bought land that is suitable for a residence, he's immediately considered like one of the people of the city. This contradicts the first Baraita. The Gemara answers, this is a dispute between two Tanaim, two rabbis of the time of the Mishnah, and they disagree with regard to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Okay. So that's the end of all the discussion about that particular Mishnah. Now we're starting a new Mishnah, several paragraphs long. Yes, go ahead, Hi.
I missed the first part, so
Yeah.
maybe it was discussed. Is there some moral issue with who you accept funds in a charity from?
Oh, that's
From the other side of the coin?
right. So in other words,
Do we
somebody
make
like a
that
criminal who is
Or
donating.
whatever the source is of
Uh-huh.
the funds, does that,
Right.
do we morally not accept, even though there are people in need and we have a
Yeah.
charity?
So
to speak?
that's a good question, and I believe there is a section of Mishnah and Talmud that does talk about how to support the charity fund and where money is coming in from. So I don't recall offhand about those issues, but it would seem clear to me that if a known criminal wants to donate to the charity fund, one should not accept that money because you should assume that that money was ill-gotten, and that that's the charity fund isn't any place for it.
That's kind of a black and white situation.
Right.
As opposed to a lot of gray in this world.
Yeah, so I think that the rabbis would tend to turn a blind eye for gray matters when it comes to a charity fund, because the possibility is there that by giving the money, that's kind of an atonement for any kind of gray that could have led the person to be giving the money. So in other words, let's say someone is not the nicest of people, but they're giving money to the charity fund. So maybe by giving the money, the person is recognizing maybe it's not so good not to be nice, and this will start me on my path to being nice. So I think the rabbis would allow something like that. I was thinking more of, like, when I was in rabbinical school, there was the library at that time. So there was a major reconstruction project at the seminary, and a whole new library was built, and it had the name on it, the Ivan and Sima Boesky Family Library. Now, Boesky was famous at the time in the mid 80s for some stock scheme, whatever, and he was convicted and sent to jail. And then the question was, so what do we do with Boesky's name on the library? This is the Jewish Theological Seminary. So two terms there, Jewish and theological, could make it morally responsible for the powers that be to be more careful about the money than maybe just a secular academic institution. So they took his name off the building, but I think they kept the money.
Well, it's like Andrew Carnegie.
Uh-huh.
He was a monopolist and everything else, but he used his money very well.
Uh-huh.
Endowing libraries and what have you
Right.
across the country and
Right.
everything else.
Right.
And so,
But was Carnegie a criminal?
well, there were people who said so.
Yeah, so, okay, so the rich guys of the early 1900s, these oil barons and whatever, right, so these, maybe they weren't the nicest of people, and their business methods left a lot to be in doubt, but they also supported and endowed lots of charitable things. So Boesky, okay, was he money laundering by giving money to the seminary? I don't know, but there's a picture from the time of some gala in which the vice chancellor for development for the seminary at the time was a rabbi who actually was the rabbi of my father's synagogue in Philadelphia, Rabbi Yaakov Rosenberg. And there's a picture of him dancing with Ivan Boesky at this gala. And then months later, Boesky's in jail. But I do remember in my freshman year, a limousine would pull up to the front of the seminary, and Boesky would come out, and he would sit in on some classes in rabbinical school, maybe knowing. So he would I guess he wanted to build up his resume so that when he would go to trial. But here's Boesky who's taking classes, and he's doing good, and he's giving money. So yeah, they took his name off, but they didn't give
Some of it
the
is
money.
probably the legacy issue.
Right. No, that's right.
Uber wealthy.
Yes.
Wanna leave
That's
their
right.
name
That's
on
right.
everything.
I'm
That's
sure they
right.
had to do a number of Madoff removals.
There's right. So I don't know if the seminary, right? The
I'm sure there were Madoff sanctuaries and.
Right. But Hadassah, the Hadassah organization, lost a lot of money from Madoff, and so did Elie
But
Wiesel.
he probably donated a lot of money at one point in time too, and got names on things. I'm guessing.
He could have. Yes. So, Okay, so the first Mishnah was talking about how to put up a wall, like a privacy fence, and where in the joint property does this wall go, and do both owners of this joint property have to contribute to the building of the wall? So that was the first Mishnah. So the court does not divide a courtyard at the request of one of the joint owners unless there will be in it 4 by 4 cubits for this one and 4 by 4 cubits for that one. That is this minimum area for each of the joint owners. So if the land is big enough, then you can divide the courtyard. If it's not big enough, then no. And the court does not divide a jointly owned field unless there is space in it to plant 9 kav of seed for this one and 9 kav of seed for that one. So there's a background of how much a kav is. Just a second. Measurements of area in the Talmud are based on the amount of space required for the sowing of certain quantities of seed. A beit seah is the space required in order to sow 1 seah of seed and is equivalent to 2,500 square cubits. Accordingly, and in keeping with the different opinions on the length of a cubit, the area of 9 kav equals between 950 and 1,400 square meters. The area of half a kav equals 50 to 80 square meters, and the area of a quarter kav equals half of this. Okay, so if that helps in any way, that's what it is. Rabbi Yehuda says the court does not divide a field unless there's space in it to plant 9 half kav of seed for this one and 9 half kav of seed for that one. And the court does not divide a jointly owned garden unless there's space in it to plant a half kav of seed for this one and a half kav of seed for that one. Rabbi Akiva says that half that amount is sufficient. That is the area required for sowing a quarter kav of seed. Similarly, the court does not divide a hall, a drawing room, a dovecote, a cloak, a bathhouse, an olive press, and an irrigated field unless there is enough for this one to use the property in the usual manner and enough for that one to use the property in the usual manner. This is the principle. Anything for which, when it is divided, each of the parts is large enough to retain the name of the original item, the court divides it. But if the parts will not retain the original name, the court does not divide it. So if it's large enough to be called a field, but if you divide it, it would no longer be called a field, then you don't divide it. When does this rule apply? It applies when the joint owners do not both wish to divide the item. When only one of the owners wish to divide the property, he cannot force the other to do so. But when both of them wish to divide the item, they may divide it even if each of the owners will receive less than the amount specified above. So, right, the field has to be large enough to divide if only one of the owners wants to divide it. But if both of the owners want to divide it, then it doesn't matter how big it is because both of them are agreeing to divide it. But in the case of sacred writings, that is, a scroll of any of the 24 books of the Bible that were inherited by two people, they may not divide them even if both of them wish to do so because it would be a show of disrespect to cut the scroll in half. Okay, so some things can be divided, some things can't be divided, and a book, which is written in a scroll, in other words, let's say that you take a Torah from the Ark and you want to divide the Torah among the heirs of the person who owned the Torah, because people did have their own Torahs at home. You can't break up a Torah like that. You have to figure out a different way for the heirs to share the Torah. Okay, so it's 10:19, and I have something to prepare for 10:30. So we'll stop here for today, the end of this Mishnah, and we'll continue next Sunday. So have a good day, everybody, and a good rest of the day. And
Thank you.
take care, everybody.